Veynar's presence spreads across the field without form, without warning. The heroes unite, but the system responds in ways they don't yet understand. Serin and Thalassa prepare in silence, already aligned with what's coming. Subscribe to Turmoil Studio. The real war hasn't begun. The lattice did not collapse. It crossed the point where collapse was no longer defined. Because collapse requires a system to believe in a single failure state. And this system no longer did. It now recognized multiple survivable truths. Aurelytha stood above everything, unmoved, unshaken, unchanged. Not because nothing challenged her, but because all challenge existed within her doctrinal framework. Caelum felt it immediately. It's no longer reacting to contradiction. Thorn's eyes narrowed. It's classifying contradiction as structure. Nyx exhaled softly. So chaos is now part of governance. Aurelytha's voice descended through the lattice like absolute law. Chaos is an incomplete interpretation of governed structure. A pause. Nothing exists outside doctrine. Then 3 presences entered the lattice field. Not as disruption, but as authorized forces of system evolution. Veynar stepped forward. Reality tightened around his presence. Not resistance, recognition. Deviation detected within acceptable enforcement range. His gaze locked onto unstable branches. Correction remains valid, Riven muttered. That feels like reality has a police system now. Lyra answered quietly. It always did. We just crossed into noticing it. Caelum arrived next. The lattice stabilized around him automatically. No resistance, no distortion, just structural alignment. System integrity is no longer failing, he said calmly. A pause. It is diversifying beyond singular validation. Serin followed. She moved through contradiction without triggering collapse. Not because she avoided it, but because she made it survivable. You are still treating instability as error, she said softly. A pause. It is not error. It is unresolved continuity. Aurelytha did not react, because her authority did not require reaction. It defined reaction boundaries. All forms of contradiction remain within doctrine, she stated. A pause. They are not outside governance. Seraphine stepped forward. The lattice narrowed around her presence. Not forcefully, precisely. Coherence is not singularity, she said. It is continuity under interpretation pressure. Across from her, Lysandra stood. Not fragmented, not duplicated, distributed across simultaneous valid states. Then, continuity is not owned by coherence, she replied. It is shared across divergence. The lattice reacted instantly, not with collapse, but with evaluation. For the first time, it did not ask which was correct. It measured how both could coexist. Kyle whispered, "It's not choosing between them anymore." A pause. It's calculating coexistence capacity. Veynar tested a divergence branch. It collapsed, then reformed elsewhere. He paused. Persistence beyond correction threshold. End quote. Caelum observed. Correction is no longer elimination. End quote. A pause. It is redistribution of instability. Serin stepped into a failing branch. It stabilized instantly. Not repaired. Made survivable. You are overcorrecting both enforcement and expansion, she said. The lattice shifted again. Not chaos, not order, but structured multiplicity under governance. Aurelytha descended slightly, and for the first time everything synchronized attention. Not obedience, recognition. Arc 2 has reached its doctrine event horizon, she said. A pause. No single truth may dominate, but no truth is removed. The lattice stabilized into something unprecedented. Coherence layer, Seraphine. Divergence layer, Lysandra. Enforcement layer, Veynar. Integrity layer, Caelum. Survival layer, Serin. Doctrine anchor, Aurelytha. All active, all contained, all valid. Caelum. exhaled slowly. So nothing is broken. A pause. Everything is allowed. Nyx gave a faint smile. That's the scariest kind of stability. Aurelytha's final voice echoed through the lattice. Not as ending, as definition. This is governed evolution. A pause. Arc 2 is complete. The lattice did not move. It waited. Not for collapse, not for victory, but for what comes after a system learns it does not need to choose one truth. It begins to learn what happens when truth itself stops being a decision. The lattice did not collapse. It reorganized. Not outward, not inward, but sideways across dimensions of interpretation that had never been active before. Caelum felt it like a pressure behind thought itself. This isn't evolution anymore. Thorn's eyes narrowed sharply. It's migration. Nyx tilted her head slowly. So, where's it going? No one answered immediately, because the answer was forming inside them, not outside them. The lattice no longer had a single center. It had centers that disagreed on being centers. And in that disagreement, something new stabilized. Not Seraphine's coherence field, not Lysandra's divergence field, but something that existed because both could no longer dominate the same space. Aurelytha finally moved. For the first time in the entire sequence of trials, she did not descend. She expanded. Her wings did not flare outward. They unfolded into layered geometries of golden law, each wing no longer a symbol of control, but of jurisdiction over possibility. Arc boundary reached, she said. Her voice no longer echoed. It structured the space around it. Arc 2. Final stability threshold initiated. Final. Caelum's breath slowed. Final stability? Lyra looked at him. That sounds like an ending. Riven tightened his stance instinctively. Or a lock. Thorn corrected quietly. Or a selection event. Nyx smiled faintly. Or a trap, pretending to be closure. And then, the lattice answered. Not as sound, not as vision, but as a redefinition of available reality. And every strand of the paradox engine stopped fluctuating. For the first time, contradiction did not multiply. It paused, as if something higher had placed a finger on the system and said, "Enough branching." Seraphine felt it immediately. Her field of continuity tightened without her command. Not collapsing, not expanding, but being contained into definition space. She exhaled slowly. Something above coherence is activating. Lysandra tilted her head. But unlike before, she did not split. She did not multiply. Instead, her presence deepened, as if all versions of her had agreed to listen at once. "It's not above us," she said quietly. A pause. "It's around us." The space shifted, and then they appeared. Not through portals, not through arrival, but through activation of roles that already existed in the system, but had not been permitted expression. First, Veynar. He did not step into the lattice. He defined where the lattice could fail. His presence carried no visible aura, no distortion field. Instead, reality near him became logically unstable in a controlled way, as if strategy itself had gained a body. His eyes scanned everything once. Only once. "So this is where it breaks," he said quietly. Not impressed. Not surprised. Measuring. 4. Caelum frowned slightly. "Who is he?" Thorn answered immediately. "Not an operator." A pause. A structural strategist. Nyx's expression sharpened. "That's not a role I like." Then, a second presence emerged. Not opposite, not aligned, but adjacent to system enforcement logic itself. Caelum arrived like pressure becoming discipline, where Seraphine shaped coherence through balance. Caelum shaped it through judgment of structural necessity. He looked at Seraphine first, then Lysandra, then the lattice. "It has already gone too far," he said calmly. Lyra stepped slightly back. "Too far in what direction?" Caelum didn't look at her. All directions. And a third presence arrived. But this one did not enter. It confirmed itself as already present. Serin. He did not carry authority like Aurelytha. He carried recognition pressure, as if the system itself was forced to admit what he pointed at. He looked at Lysandra, and for the first time the lattice reacted with hesitation. Not instability, not expansion, but uncertainty of classification. This one, Serin said softly, is no longer a variant. A pause. It is a propagation source. Riven muttered. That sounds bad. Nyx replied. That sounds irreversible. Aurelytha did not react aggressively. She simply observed them. But now, even she had to adjust her wings into a new alignment, because the system had introduced external definers of reality structure. Caelum stepped forward slightly. You three aren't part of the trial architecture. Veynar finally looked at him. No, a pause. We are what the architecture becomes aware of when it stops being stable. And then, the lattice tightened. Not like compression, like attention focusing. And Veynar continued. You reached identity multiplicity. He glanced at Lysandra. That was phase 1 of failure tolerance expansion. Then he looked at Seraphine. You stabilized contradiction. A pause. That was phase 2. His gaze shifted upward toward Aurelytha. But you did not control what happens when both exist at scale. Thorn's voice dropped. Phase 3. Co-1. Serin nodded once. Propagation governance collapse. Nyx exhaled softly. I really don't like that phrase. The lattice responded. For the first time, it did not simulate outcomes. It projected consequences directly into perception. Caelum saw it. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but structurally. A system where Seraphine's coherence expands until all variance becomes regulated suppression. Lysandra's multiplicity expands until no decision retains singular consequence. Aurelytha's doctrine becomes unable to anchor either side, and between them reality stops being two. Stable enough to define event. Caelum whispered. This isn't conflict anymore. A pause. It's divergence without boundary. Veynar nodded. Correct. Caelum stepped forward slightly, which means enforcement must occur. Seraphine turned toward him. Enforcement of what? Caelum answered without hesitation. Termination of uncontrolled propagation vectors. Silence. Hit. Like pressure. Lysandra looked at him. Not angry. Not defensive. Curious. And I am the vector. Serin answered quietly. Yes. That single word changed the lattice. Because now identity was no longer just observed. It was classified for removal conditions. Riven stepped forward instantly. You don't get to decide that. Caelum finally looked at him. I already did. Nyx laughed once, but it was dry. That's the most dangerous sentence in any system. Aurelytha's voice deepened. Not louder, heavier. Stand down from enforcement presumption. Eru. Caelum did not move. Doctrine authority is degrading. Aurelytha responded instantly. Doctrine is not authority. A pause. It is boundary memory. The lattice shuddered, because that statement redefined even Aurelytha's role. Veynar raised a hand slightly. Enough. And immediately the lattice stopped reacting to emotional tension. It switched to strategic evaluation mode. Caelum felt it. It's ignoring sentiment. Thorn nodded slowly. It's prioritizing system survival architecture. Veynar looked at Lysandra again. You are not the problem. A pause. You are the stress test result. Lysandra tilted her head slightly. Then what fails? Serin answered. The definition of singular control. Silence. Then the lattice began to reorganize again. But this time, it did not center around Seraphine. It did not center around Lysandra.